Hello. All right. So this is week 5, or the final week in the unit, How to Laugh Forever. And that line comes straight from a vignette in the Joy Luck Club. I see A Doll's House and the Joy Luck Club as linked. I think the Joy Luck Club is questioning, what can I be? Who am I in the world? What I am is so intrinsically linked to where I've come from and who has poured into me. And now I have to hold that and become someone. And A Doll's House by Henry Gibson is the answer to some of those questions. It's Nora standing up, packing her bags and saying, okay, I'm off. I'm off into the world now. She's having this moment of assertion that we never quite saw between some of the characters in the Joy Luck Club. But we wanted it from them. We wanted to see Waverly and Rich, having these confrontations, and Harold and Lena. We wanted to see the way that you could face something and have a critical conversation with someone you care about. That's exactly what Nora and Torvald do, but of course in a sad way. So I'm linking it then at the end. The task for today, the creative analysis task for today, I'm just introducing you to literary lenses. It's worth doing at some point sooner rather than later in the year, because we'll have a paper at some point. I'm not going to do it yet. I was going to, but I think I'll wait until the winter, where you're going to design your own paper, your own literary lens. And so I just want you to begin exposing yourself, you probably already have heard of some of these, to some literary lenses or academic theories. Probably use the word theory more in the news, but I'm going to use the word lens because I find that to be a really visual, helpful tool for how do you read a text? Well, you put a lens over the text and you look at it through that lens. Today, the lens in question will be feminism. Can you read A Doll's House separate from the feminist lens? Or do you have to invoke a feminist lens and critique of the text? So that's where we're moving in this quick lecture. How to Laugh Forever. I'm including this vignette because I think the central question here is what threads us from Joy Luck Club through to A Doll's House. I love this vignette. It's when the grandma is speaking to her grandbaby, and she's sort of cynical. She's saying, gosh, you're so happy, and I'm not anymore. If I can't be happy, it must be because I have some darkness in me. If I now recognize evil in other people, is it not because I have been evil too? So there is this self-reflection, this introspection, and with it, the cynicism that comes from realizing that she's no longer innocent. But then this baby is laughing, and the grandma says, oh, you're laughing because why? You've already lived forever. You already know the answers to these questions. Well, can you tell me? I am listening. And then she says, thank you, little queen. Then you must teach my daughter the same lesson. How to lose your innocence, but not your hope. How to laugh forever. That question, how do you lose your innocence without losing your hope? It drives the play. That is the question of the play. It's the question of A Doll's House by Henry Gibson. But it is a universal question. You could apply that question to Lord of the Flies, to Good Country People, so many texts that we've read, not just in this class, but outside of it. How do you grow up while maintaining a sense of adventure and a sense of optimism and hope and faith? And I think that's what we see with Nora in the scene that I'd like you to consider this week for your organization assignment. So it's a universal question, but it's difficult to separate A Doll's House from questions of womanhood, of traditional gender roles, of the constraints of someone's assigned sex. Nora is living in this constricted 19th century Norwegian home where her father treats her, as she says, like a little doll, and then her husband does, and she can't get out of that. And for many years, she herself is trapped in the thinking of a doll until this moment where her innocence goes away. So, feminism, that's the question. That's what I want you to think about. But what is feminism? It is a literary theory. It's a literary lens. So academic lens, literary lens, kind of all the same. So I'm going to connect this back to another text we read, The Story of an Hour. They're really similar, right? I mean, The Story of an Hour is written by Kate Chopin about 15 years later in St. Louis, Missouri, not Norway, but it's the same time. The house even seems similar, just the way that there's so much of this domestic space that inhabits the text. Like, you can't get out of these rooms in these texts. But both Kate Chopin and Henrik Ibsen are known to have insisted that they were not trying to write a text about the domestic sphere. They were not trying to write a text that was championing feminism. They were just trying to write stories about humanity, stories about real people. And they stumbled into this territory. It reminds me of Maurice Sendak, the author of Where the Wild Things Are, who said, I don't write books for children. I write books, and then someone says, that's for children. And so, similarly, Ibsen said, the questions that you're raising about feminism are questions for the audience. I didn't think about those questions. And that has got me thinking about all of the different lenses that you could apply to a text. So I'm sharing with you a document I made for you to have. The only one you really need to think about this week is the feminist lens. At some point, I'll bring us back to this document, and I'm going to ask you to take one of the lenses and apply it to a text of your choice. And that will be the paper that you write, the longer paper where you have lots of time and research. We're not going to do that now. We were going to, but I don't want to. I want to dive into poetry after this week, and we'll do it in the winter. So I give you this gift, this academic literary lens document. I made this document, made it, though, through the College Board. So my source is AP College Board. They published a model syllabi, a set of syllabi back in the day, 10 years ago, and one of them included this, a list of these theories. And so I just fleshed it out, and I added 2 columns. The middle column is what a professor or student might say if they are thinking in this way about a text. And then the last column is typical questions that this lens asks of a text. My exemplar throughout is Shakespeare, so I'm just pretending that that's the text on the table. What is a lens that you would apply to Shakespeare? There's a bunch. This is not an exhaustive list. It's simply a list of some of the most popular ones in the last 150 years or so. And it moves towards the end into the big ones from the 20th century, formalism, new criticism, and then some of our social theories, of which feminism is one. Sidebar, the AP Literature exam embodies new criticism, the lens that says you do not need to know anything about a text in order to read it well. It is a really democratic lens. Some lenses ask for the writer, the reader, to be really knowledgeable about the text, go do research to understand its history, its cultural moment. New criticism says that is unfair. If the text is any good, it'll be good for everybody, no matter what kind of research they have. I mention this because the organization assignment this week is the FRQ2, which gives you a passage of something you'll never have seen before and asks you to analyze it. That's new criticism at its finest. You, the student, should be able to, if it's a good text, have something to say about it, even if you don't know it, really. So that is what we do, kind of, though you've read the whole play. Anyway, within that world, we get into these social lenses, and you can see here, I've got a bunch listed that emerged in the late 20th century: Marxist studies, feminist studies, and queer studies, which were all really important applications of subgroups of the way that people who had been marginalized were coming to these texts now and saying, yeah, but what about us? What about the ways that characters who are coming from the communities that we have grown to love are embodied or they're shaped in these texts? Feminist is here. What does the work, in this case A Doll's House, imply about the possibilities of sisterhood as a mode of resisting patriarchy? That's an example question. How are men and women portrayed in opposition to each other? All of those things are where we are with this feminist lens. And then you can kind of go down to the bottom one is where I want us to land eventually. What is your tendency? Where do you find yourself moving already as a student? That will be food for thought later. All right. So I'm getting in the weeds a little bit. Let me bring us to our question. I am simply asking you to apply a feminist reading to the text. And I've linked, this is just a little Al Purdue useful writing lab site, a little bit about feminist criticism, so you can quickly scan through it and see what sorts of questions it asks of the text and how it thinks about text. So my question is, would it be fair to conduct a feminist reading of A Doll's House? Or is that too reductionist of an application, as Henry Gibson insists? Find a quote from the text that supports your opinion either way, and write a paragraph explaining what you believe, and post them. I'm very curious to have these in a public sphere. So, for example, you might find a quote at the end where Nora is telling Torvald she's leaving him, and you might use that quote to assert that this is clearly a feminist moment where a woman is finding her own possibilities in the world. Equally, you could find a quote where she is asserting her own humanity, and you could assert that this isn't about feminism. This is simply about being human. So I leave you to that really interesting intellectual question, and I'm curious what you have to say. Feel free to ask me questions. I don't think we've done something quite like this before. All right?